So the final section of the text starts in that present moment, the hypothetical present of the story, 1935, where it begins. And so it has this sort of cyclical temporal structure where we return to the moment where we begun. And I think that movement, that sort of seamless movement that it creates across up to 70 odd years of history, gives us a clear sense of the way that this town is refusing to change. The Negro met the first of the ladies at the front door and let them in with their hushed, sibilant voices and their quick, curious glances. Again, this functions like synecdoche, that their hushed, sibilant voices and their quick, curious glances are a component of their gossipy sense of community. That their faceless sense of community is evident here. This hushed, sibilant voices and quick, curious glances that they're whispering about what's gone on, and they're desperately looking around the house to find out what's happened. And then he disappeared. He walked right through the house and out the back and was not seen again. There's this sense through this characterization of Tobe, of his complete servitude, that there's no connection to the people or the place here, and that because she has died, he is now no longer a slave to her, and that he is at the moment, there's a sort of emancipation here. This is sort of almost like a kind of manumission that goes on here. The two female cousins came at once. They held the funeral on the second day, with the town coming to look at Miss Emily. I think that phrase gives us this sort of personification of the town itself, with this rapacious curiosity and morbid fascination. It's beneath a mass of bought flowers, with the crayon face of her father musing profoundly above the bier, and the lady sibilant and macabre. And so the setting itself is represented as sort of masculine, and it's still dominant even in death, but is attacked by sort of female whispers here. A mass of bought flowers, another sign of that sense of supposed good old southern manners. That crayon face of her father musing profoundly above the bier, and the lady sibilant and macabre, that they are both grim in themselves through their gossipy whispering. And the very old men, some in their brushed Confederate uniforms, on the porch and the lawn. So again, these men are turning up to this funeral in their Confederate Army uniforms, showing us that they see this as a moment to invoke that identity and that value system. It was a chance to memorialize that way of life in Emily's funeral. Talking of Miss Emily as if she had been a contemporary of theirs, believing that they had danced with her and courted her perhaps, confusing time with its mathematical progression. And so we've got this diction here, believing as if perhaps, that reveals the relativistic and unreliable uncertainty in their impression of the past, and that they've confused time with its mathematical progression, that time is not just the advance of years and the passage of time as a physical phenomenon, but time itself is more to do with social norms and the values that change throughout time. It says, as the old do, to whom all the past is not a diminishing road, but instead a huge meadow which no winter ever quite touches. And so in this metaphor, past and time itself is an untainted ideal, and it is expansive and in scope and influence, and that it's never destroyed by any kind of winter of the present, there's changing values that destroy the way that we see it. It's divided from them now by the narrow bottleneck of the most recent decade of years. And so this metaphor of the bottleneck of a decade of years shows us its insignificance. This huge meadow of the past that they're free to frolic in is only separated by this insignificant little bottleneck that is the most recent decade of years. Already, we knew that there was one room in that region above stairs which no one had seen in 40 years and which would have to be forced. And so the town has at least partial awareness of this, but has let it pass. And so there's a sense of complicity here. They waited until Miss Emily was decently in the ground before they opened it. And there's something sort of mannered in this diction that I think shows us a sense of ironic sarcasm here, that we waited for her to be buried in the ground before we forced her door open in her house. The violence of breaking down the door seemed to fill this room with pervading dust. A thin, acrid pall, as if the tomb seemed to lie everywhere upon this room, decked and furnished as for a bridal. And so again, the setting here shows us the way that the room becomes a coffin in which they experience both the death of Emily, but also of a way of life that they have sustained. This tomb is their past. It's decked and furnished as for a bridal. And so Emily has made a tomb of her bridal room. And both she's killed and defined by patriarchy. She dies in a tomb that shows the way that she's defined as a flawed kind of bride. That she, because of her failure to become a married woman, that's ultimately caused her death. Upon the valance curtains of faded rose colour, upon the rose-shaded lights, the repetition of this colour, I think, is the eponymous rose in the title, and that she herself is being given the rose of the story, that the story almost functions as a tribute to her. And so there's a sort of even more ironic sense of the writer himself writing this story as a tribute to her and perhaps the lifestyle that she represents. The rose-shaded lights upon the dressing table, upon the delicate array of crystal and the man's toilet things backed with tarnished silver. Silver so tarnished that the monogram is obscured. So there's this careful composition of the scene, but the silver is so tarnished because of age and time. You can't even see who it is anymore. And it's important that it's almost like the details of the scene are not the focus here. It is Emily's death as the representation of the death of a way of life that they're seeing. Among them lay a collar and tie, as if they'd just been removed, which left upon the surface a pale crescent in the dust. And so the past is totally, the distinction between past and present is collapsed, and that we're trapped here in the past. Yeah, it's as if they'd just been removed, but there's this enormous accumulation of dust that shows us how long it's been actually since it was just removed. This is obviously Homer Baron's belongings. Upon a chair hung the suit, carefully folded, beneath it the two mute shoes and the discarded socks. The man himself lay in bed, and the description here is as if this is recent, as if Homer Baron has just laid this here himself. For a long while we just stood there looking down at the profound and fleshless grin, this description of Homer Baron as if he's in peace and enjoying it, but he's so emaciated and thin because he's been rotting there for 40 years that he's fleshless. The body had apparently once lain in the attitude of an embrace, but now the long sleep that outlasts love, that conquers even the grimace of love, had cuckolded him. And this is an incredibly important sentence in this story. And now the long sleep that outlasts love reveals death triumphant over love itself, and that conquers its even the grimace of love. In that paradoxical description here is of love being like a grimace of pain. And it has cuckolded him, that death itself cheats on him with Emily, as if death is something that he's made a kind of loving pact and relationship with in this tomb that she has assembled. He looks as if he's been in love and wedded to death, and it has cuckolded him now by embracing, in inverted commas, Emily in that throe of love in death. What was left of him, rotted beneath what was left of the nightshirt, had become inextricable from the bed in which he lay. And so again, they're sort of blending together and becoming, sort of collapsing into this sort of amalgamation of mortality. And upon him, and upon the pillow beside him, lay that even coating of the patient and biding dust. And that time has this kind of sense of desirable features here. The time itself is patient and biding, as if sticking to the past is a good thing. But we're seeing this through this rotting body and a corpse. I think this is a clear warning about the theme of a refusal to adapt to the changes of the present and modernity here. The patient and biding dust is what we're seeing in this moment, and it is a warning from Faulkner about the dangers of refusing to adapt to the changes in society. Then we noticed that in the second pillar was the indentation of a head. And so she's lying here, deeply attached, and that the murder is the only way for her to experience love. So we have this grim sort of ambivalence about her status, empathizing with her alienation and loneliness, but seeing her as a fairly vicious murderer. One of us lifted something from it, and leaning forward, that faint and invisible dust grey and acrid in the nostrils, we saw a long strand of iron grey hair. And so that final symbol of time passing to the townsfolk, and her being sort of rigidly defined through the passage of time and a declined sense of value, is what we end the story with. That she was always defined by her value or lack of value as a woman because she was unable to be married, and that here this is what it led to. She attempted to create that sense of purpose and value. The only way that it could be possible was by killing someone and freezing herself in the posture of a bridal suite on a wedding night.